Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf Kovchav Bava Basra 120. Today's daf is dedicated for a shmir for the Chayalim, Hatzal for the Shvilim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael. In this Eis Tzara daf yomi, we're going to start on the bottom of 119b. 119b, as the daf yomi is going to start on 119b on the bottom line, where the Gemara says that the daughters of Tzlafchad, because they were tzidkanios, because they were so righteous, they gave birth even though they got married at the age of 40. And so the Gemara says, Mitoch tzidkanios, and because they were righteous, Naso anes ki yochavet. A miracle happened to them like yochavet. This is the Daf Yomi recording on the eve of Simchas Torah. And Simchas Torah, we complete the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is the Daf Yomi that talks about the birth of Moses, or actually the birth of Moshe's mother. A man went from the house of Levi, and he took a daughter of Levi. Is it possible that she's 130 years old, the Karla Abbas, and she's called a daughter? She's 130 years old. She's by that point a grandma. She's Safta. Why is she being called Bas? How do we know she's 130? Because Rashi tells us in the Torah in two places in his commentary that it says that Yocheved was that the Jewish people were in Egypt for 210 years, and the Jewish people were in Egypt for 210 years, and Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 years old when he left, and Yocheved was born on the way down to Egypt, or she was conceived right when they walked into Egypt. So therefore, 210 minus 80 is 130. So Moshe Rabbeinu was born when Yocheved was 130 years old. So we see from here, and how could she give birth? How could she be called a Bas? So how do we know that she was that this miracle happened, that she was called a Bas? Because Rambam Baruch Hanina says, it says in the verse that all those went down to Egypt were 70, but when you count them, they're only 69. So he says that this refers to Yocheved, who was conceived on the journey down to Egypt, and she was born between the walls. And it says, Asher Yaldo Sal Levi b'Mitzrayim. She was born to Levi in Egypt. Leidasa b'Mitzrayim. She was born in Egypt. V'Arasa Shalom b'Mitzrayim. But she was conceived not in Egypt. So where was she conceived? She was born between the walls. So if that's the case, in my Karo Abbas, why was she called a Bas? Why was she called a daughter? Amar Yehuda Bar Zvida, Narus. She had the signs of youth that were born to her miraculously. Nis'aden Abasar, her flesh became soft. Nispashtu Akamatin, her wrinkles became straight. Chazar Yofilim Koma, and the beauty returned to its place. So the Gemara says, why does it say that Amram married Yocheved? They were already married by that point. It should have said he brought her back, because as the Midrash tells us, they had separated. Moshe's parents separated after the birth of Aaron and Miriam. They separated because Miriam and Aaron, because and they were worried that Paro made a decree he was going to kill all the boys. And they said, if we have a boy, he's going to be killed. So they separated. So Miriam said to them, you're worse than Paro. Paro made just a decree upon the boys, and you're making a decree upon the boys and the girls. So he took her back. So why does it say he married her? It should say he remarried. Sorry, brought her back. So Rabbi Yehuda Bar Zvida, he did like a marriage ceremony with her. Hoshiva Ba'Pirion, he put her on a bridal chair. Aaron and Miriam Mishorim Lefanera. And Aaron, who was at this point two and a half, and Miriam, they were singing before her. And the ministering angels were saying, the mother of the children shall rejoice. Gemara says, going back to the daughters of Tzlafchad, later on it counts them. They're listed in two different orders in the Torah. So the second time they're listed, that's by the division of the land, there lists them by age order. But here lists them by their wisdom. This sports Rabbi Ami, who says The yeshiva, when you're studying Torah, when you're sitting there and studying Torah, like you're discussing the ideas that we should inherit, hol chachma, then you follow wisdom. The mesiba, when it comes to a party, hol chachar zikna, then you go after the age. That's where there's exceptional wisdom or exceptional age. According to the Tanya Be'er Shmuel, were equal. That they were equal. It doesn't mean that they were equal, because we just said that one was that this is why they were listed two different ways. So some explain that it means that they completed each other. That's what the Chasam Sofer says, that they all had the qualities, complete each other, and made them equivalent. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, daughters of Tzafchad were allowed to marry with all the tribes, that they weren't required to just marry into their tribe. As it says, one who's good in your eyes, you should marry. So what do we do with the fact that the verse says, so what do we do with the fact that the verse says, for the family of the tribe of your fathers, you should take wives? Meaning to say you have to marry into your tribe. So that's not a commandment for them to marry into their tribes. That was just Eitza Tova Hisian, that the Torah was giving them good advice. Eitza Tova Hisian, they should marry somebody appropriate. So Moshe Rabbah, Rabbah says, Amor Sinai. It says in the pasuk with respect to the prohibition of eating sacred food, which was while you're in a state of tumah. It says in the pasuk, Amor Alehem. It says in the verse, Amor Alehem L'dor Sechem. It says in the verse, you shall say to them about this prohibition for all future generations. But when it says Amor Alehem, when it says say to them, Va'osan ha'omdim al Har Sinai, that refers to the generation of the wilderness. L'dor Sechem. This verse is also said for future generations. Eludor Sabaim. This refers to the future generations. So im nemar avos, lama nemar banim, im nemar banim, lama nemar avos. So why do we have this commandment both for the generation of the wilderness and also for future generations? And the Gemara explains we need the reason why this commandment needs to be given for both because there are some commandments that only apply to the future generations, the banim, and there are some only apply to the avos. How so? By future generations, it says the chol but it means say by the generations of the wilderness, it says the chol that any girl who inherits, she has to marry within her tribe. But that was only for that generation, the generation of the wilderness, but not for future generations. And there are many commandments that are commanded to the children, but not to the generation of the wilderness. This refers to the commandments that have to do with the land of Israel. So therefore, for this reason, therefore, by the case of the eating the hekdesh in a state of tumah, you have to say both commandments, the ones that apply to that it applies to the generation of the wilderness and also to the future generations. But anyway, we see from here, Katani Mios Ba'avosu Omer Chobasi Reshus Nachla. Anyway, we see from here that by the generation of the wilderness, it says that every girl who inherits has to marry within her tribe. So how could the daughters of Tzlafchad marry outside their tribe? So whom most of love, whom Mefariklah. So he asked this question. Rabbi asked this question, and he answered it. He said, the prohibition to marry into your tribe, outside of your tribe, if you inherited, did not apply to the daughters of Tzlafchad. They were excluded from it. And the Tziv says, because they were so prominent, they were excluded. Amar Mar, so let's analyze this brisa. But Avosu Omer, by the earlier generation, it states, by earlier generation, it says any girl who inherits has to marry within her tribe. But avos im bebanim lo, and that implies only for the generation of the wilderness. Means only the generation of the wilderness has to marry within their tribe, but others can marry whoever they want. Future generations can marry wherever they want. My mashma, how do we know this from these words? Amarav Amakra, because it says V'zeh davar, because the words V'zeh davar imply that davar zeh and oeg el b'dor zeh, that this prohibition only applies in the generation of the wilderness. So the Gemara says, Amrei Rabba, Zuti Ravashi Amata, Zadavar, the Shlute Chutz. The phrase Zadavar also applies by animals that are slaughtered outside the temple. This idea that you're not allowed to take a sacrificial animal and slaughter it outside the temple, does that also only apply in the generation of the wilderness? It's not the case. We know it applies elsewhere. Gemara says, no, Shani Hatzam, that case is different. Because it says by Shchutei Chutz that this law will be for all your generations. So therefore we know it applies. So therefore it applies for all future generations. So the Gemara says, what about the fact that Davar de Rashi Amatos? What about the fact that when it comes to or on top of Kof Chaf on my base, when it comes to the prohibition, the idea that you can annul vows, it says Zadavar. In that case also, Zadavar Shetziva Hashem, that the heads of the tribes can annul the vows. Is that also only supposed to be for the generation of the wilderness, but not for future generations? Mara says, no. So the Gemara says, no, that's compared to Shlutei Chutz. It tells it applies in all future generations as well. Well, if that's the case, also by the daughters, the prohibition of marrying outside your tribe, should also learn out Zezeh from Shlutei Chutz and say it applies to future generations. Gemara says, no, it can't work. Bishlam Mahasam, in the case of the vows, it's just Xer Shava. We need to do Zezeh for Xer Shava to learn out halacha. But here, with respect to marrying outside the tribes, why would we need Zezeh? What halacha would it be teaching us? Lishto Kramine. Pasuk would have been quiet. And I would have known it's for all future generations. So therefore, from the fact that it says Zeh, teaches us only for the generation of the wilderness. My Xer Shava, what Xer Shava, what halacha is learned out as it relates to the concept of the vows and also Shlutei Chutz. What's the Xer Shava? The Tanya Nemar Kan Zeh Davar Nemar Lolon Zeh Davar. It says here, this is the teaching, and it says there. It says here, Nemar Khan, it says here, just like the concept of Shlutei Chutz applies to Aaron and his sons and all of Israel, that they can't slaughter a sacred animal outside the temple. Avkan, Aaron Uvanav will call Yisrael. So too, we're going to learn out also from here that it applies to Aaron and his sons and all of Israel by annulling the vows. So the Gemara says, Oma kan Rashi Matos, Aflalon Rashi Matos. So maybe by the annulment of vows, it only applies to the heads of the tribes. Also by sacrifices, it should only be prohibited for your head of the tribes. Amar Alon, Aaron Uvanav, call Yisrael. Afkan, Aaron Uvanav, call Yisrael. And just like we know that by Shlutei Chutz it applies to everyone, so to the annulment of vows can it be to Aaron and his children, all of Israel. So if that's the case, what's the halacha that we're saying that the annulment of vows applies to Aaron and his children and all of Israel? It's to teach us that the annulment of vows can take place with three regular common people. So since three non-experts can annul vows, that's what we learn out by comparing it to Shlutei Chutz. Where it says Varashi Matos Ksivbe, but it says the heads of the tribes. The Gemara says, no, what does that mean? Know that if you're an expert, that's what it means, the heads of the tribes. That if you're an expert, you can annul the vow by yourself. So here too, that's what it's telling us, that if you're an expert, you can annul the vows. So Ma'akan Rashi Matos, Afalon Rashi Matos. Ma'i Hilchasa. So from the fact that it says by annulment of vows, the heads of the tribes, what do we learn out by Shchutei Chutz, the heads of the vows? What's halacha is it teaching us? So Amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Sheish She'ela Behektish, teaches the fundamental idea that if you want to annul a vow as it relates to hektish, you can do it. Meaning, say if somebody mistakenly consecrates something to the temple, he can annul it. Gemara says, "Beis Shammai the Amri ain't sheila behektish." According to Beis Shammai, who says you can't annul a vow as it relates to hektish, so therefore he doesn't have exera shava. And so what's he going to do? And how do we know that Beis Shammai says this? Now Beis Shammai Omer hektish talos hektish. Beis Shammai says if it's a mistaken hektish, you can't annul it. Beis Hillel Omer eno hektish. Beis Hillel says you can annul it. So hi zev zeh my avdilei. So according to Beis Shammai, he can't use the Gzera Shava. So in each case, he has to learn something else. Hold on 1 second. So since he can't use them for Gzera Shava, what is Beis Shammai going to do with the Zeh? He says, Zeh Davar Deshchutei Chutz Mibayalei. So he said, when it says Zeh Davar by Shchutei Chutz, by slaughtering outside the temple, it's to teach us that you're only liable for shchita if you slaughter an animal outside the temple. But if you do malika on a bird, which is the way a bird is killed in the temple, it's not killed through slaughtering, it's killed through the Kohen sticking his thumb through the back of the neck of the bird, you're not liable, ironically. Why does it say, according to Beis Shammai, Zeh Davar by the heads of the tribes, by the annulment of vows, to tell us l'chacham matir ve'ein pal matir, bal meifar ve'ein chacham meifar. To teach us that the husband and the chacham, who are both able to annul a man's wife's vows, that they do it in different ways. The chacham uses an expression of hataras and darim, on annulment of vows, and the husband uses an expression of meifar and darim, of rejection of the vows. Or Beis Shammai delays l'gzera shavha. According to Beis Shammai, who does not have this gzera shavha zev zeh, afaras and darim mishlosh hadir. How does he know that you could annul a vow with 3 regular people? The Tana Kama, I learned it out, or Beis Hillel, I learned it out by a Gzera Shavha of the Zeh to Shchutei Chutz. But how does Beis Shammai know it? Nafkumi de Tanya, he learns it out from the fact the Brisa says, in the following Brisa, it says, Vaydaber Moshe es Moadei Hashem al Bnei Yisrael. So the Moshe spoke the holidays of God to the children of Israel. What does that mean, Moadei Hashem al Bnei Yisrael? This is the Torah reading. The first day of Sukkot, which we are now in the holiday of Sukkot. So Rabbi Yossi Omer Moadei Hashem, we're on top of Kuf Kaf Aleph. Rabbi Yossi says, Moadei Hashem Nemru, Shabbos Bereshis Lo Nemra. We'll have to see what that means. Rabbi Yossi says the festivals of God are said, but not the Shabbos, not the Shabbos. Shabbos Bereshis is called, the regular Shabbos is called Shabbos Bereshis. That's not say. Then Azai says, Moadei Hashem Nemru, Hafaras and Darim Lo Nemra. But Azai says, the festivals of God are said, but not the annulment of vows. Rabbi Yossi bar Nasan Gamer Lala Hamas Nisa. This price is very strange. He didn't understand it. So Rabbi Yossi bar Nasan went to this price. He didn't know how to explain it. Also, Basra to Rav Sheshes Nardai. He followed Rav Sheshes to Nardai. He couldn't find him. Also, Basra Machuza went to Machuza. Ashkechai. He found him. My Moadei Hashem Nemru. Shabbos Bereshis Lo Nemra. What does it mean when Rabbi Yossi says, when Rabbi Yossi clearly says that this passage teaches us the Moadei Hashem are said, but the Shabbos Bereshis is not said? Amrulay, it means Moadei Hashem Tzrichin Kiddush Bezdin. Shabbos Bereshis ain't a Tzrichin Kiddush Bezdin. The Moadei Hashem, the festivals of God, they require the sanctification of a court. The court needs to sanctify the festivals, but the Shabbos does not require the sanctification of a court. It comes automatically. You might have thought, since the passage of Shabbos is said in the passage of the holidays, you might have thought that they require in order for there to be a Shabbos, it needs to be sanctified by the court, like the festivals. Kamash 1, My Moedei Hashem Kamashmalan, that it doesn't need to be sanctified. That's what it said. Moedei Hashem Nemru Shabbos Bereshis or Nemru. Moedei Hashem required the sanctification of the court, but not the Shabbos of the Bereshis. And also we say Afaris Nadarim what does it mean? My Moedei Hashem Nemru Afaris Nadarim Lo Nemra. What does that mean? It means Moedei Hashem Tzrichen Mumchen Afaris Nadarim Eno Tzrichen Mumchen. That Moedei Hashem, their court requires 3 experts, but the annulment of vows does not require 3 experts. Where it says Varoshe Matos Ksiv, but doesn't it say the heads of the tribes by the annulment of vows? It's an individual mumcha. But anyway, we see from here that Beit Shammai is following the position of Rabbi Yossi Bar Natan, who says that the annulment of vows does not require 3 experts, and that's a source. So now the Gemara tells us, Tanan Hasam, Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Royi, Am Tovol Yisrael Chamisha Asar B'Havuk Yom Kippurim. There were no days in Israel as powerful, as precious as the 15th day of Av and Yom Kippur. Shebahem Benot Yerushalayim Yotzes B'Klit Lavan. In those days, the Bnei Yisrael would go out. The daughters of Israel would go out with white garments, she'uin, and they were borrowed shalol vayesh as misha eno, as not to embarrass anybody who doesn't have those garments. Bishlam Yom Kippurim. I understand that Yom Kippurim was one of the most happy days. Yom Slicho Mechila. It's a day of forgiveness and atonement. Yom Shenasnu Bo Luchos Achronos, because it's a day where the final luchos were given. But El Chamisha Asar Ba'av Mahi. But the 15th day of Av, why is it so special? And so the Gemara is going to now give us a lot of different reasons, maybe 5 or 6 reasons why the 15th day of Av was considered such a happy day. So I'm going to Yehuda Shmuel that it was a day, Yom Shehutru Shvatim Lavod Zeh B'Zeh. This is the day that the tribes were allowed to marry within each other. And that's why we're talking about this passage, because the daughters of Tzlafah, that generation, they weren't allowed to marry into each other. But so here we're seeing that this was the day, the 15th of Av, was where the day that the tribes are allowed to marry into each other. This goes back to the tribe of Benjamin. That the tribe of Benjamin, the concubine of Gibeah, that the tribes took an oath that they weren't allowed to marry into the tribe of Benjamin. But now on the 15th of Av, they were allowed. So they were allowed to marry into each other. But this is first, they took it that to teach us that the first thing is that the 15th of Av was when they allowed the daughters of the tribes who inherited, then they allowed them to marry, and they said it was only for the first generation that they couldn't. So what was their drasha? That this idea that if a daughter inherits, she can only marry into that tribe, that was only mentioned in this generation. Rabbi Barachana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Yom Shehuter Shevet Binyamin Lavo B'Kal. This was the day that the tribe of Benjamin was allowed to come into the community, because it says, Ish Yisrael Nishba Mitzpeh Lemor. Every man took an oath at mitzvah saying, Ish Mimenu Yitem Bito Binyamin Lisha, that none of us will give our daughters to Benjamin as a wife. So my darish, Mimenu V'Lo Mibanenu, means from us you can't marry, but not from our sons. So you can marry our sons. Our sons can marry in to the tribe of Benjamin. That was the day that they were allowed to marry into the tribe of Benjamin. Dimi Bar Yosef says, Amar Yochanan, Yom Shekol Bo Meisi Midbar. This was a day where the dead in the wilderness stopped dying. Amar Ad Shel Kol Meisi Midbar Loya Dibur Moshe. We'll pick this up. This is the for Shmini Atzeres. We'll pick this up later. We'll stop here the recording and.